My son laughed while holding my old watch and said, "This is worthless, just like you," as his wife giggled beside him. But when the jeweler announced its $1 million value, his face went pale. His ladder stopped. If you're reading this on your phone, on a bus maybe, in your bed, or hiding from the world in the corner of your kitchen, tell me where you are. Tell me if you've ever felt a laugh land on your face like a slap. I felt it that evening in my own living room, with the ceiling fan cutting the air into slow slices and the smell of last night's tea still in the cups. My son held my old watch high, like a joke he couldn't wait to tell the world. He turned the face toward the light, squinting, and his mouth bent into a smirk that did not belong to the boy I raised. "This is worthless," he said, then looked at me with a smile that wasn't a smile. "Just like you." His wife giggled from the couch, covering her lips with 2 fingers, as if that would hide the cruelty in it. The sound was small, but it traveled far. It reached my chest and stayed there, like a pin. I didn't shout. I didn't snatch the watch back or say all the heavy things that rose in me like smoke. I looked at the room instead. The carpet was worn, where my late wife used to stand and fold laundry. The curtains moved a little in the evening breeze. The house had been ours. Now it felt like a hotel where I'd overstayed. My son swayed the watch on its leather strap so it clicked against his knuckle. He laughed again, a little louder this time, because the first laugh hadn't gotten the reaction he wanted. His wife, her name is Chloe, leaned forward and widened her eyes at him, like a director encouraging an actor to give more. I could see their reflection in the mirror above the mantel. 2 young people in neat clothes, shining like polished things, and me, still in my sweater, the gray at my temples like frost, the man who had once held all 3 of us together. "Where did you even get this?" he said, turning the back of the case toward himself. "Did they give it free with a tank of gas?" Chloe's giggle turned into a whisper. "Probably from a flea market." She said it with the sweetness of someone tasting a sour fruit and pretending it's fine. The words were small coins they tossed at me to see if I would bend. My fingers rested on my knees. I watched the second hand, thin as a hair, keep time like it had always done, steady and stubborn. There was a humming in my ears, not anger, but something colder. It felt like the inside of a church in winter. He expected me to sputter, to defend myself, to say how much the watch meant. He expected me to beg for a little respect. That was the game. He would throw the line, and I would scramble to catch it. Not today, Ethan, I thought. Not like this. I breathed in and let my eyes move from his face to the little scar on his chin, the one he got when he fell from his bicycle at 7 and came running to me sobbing, his mouth a red O. He had bled on my shirt and held onto me like a life jacket. I remembered how light he was then, how small his hand felt inside mine. Memory is a quiet thief. It steals the heat from your anger and leaves you holding the cold truth in both palms. I said, "It keeps good time." My voice was flat, almost gentle. He rolled his eyes. "It keeps bad taste." He put the watch against his ear and made a face. "Even the ticking sounds tired." Chloe laughed again, then glanced at the big TV on the wall, as if she wished this scene could be streamed, liked, and shared. She shifted and crossed her legs, showing a clear heel I'd probably paid for without knowing. I noticed the tiny shimmer of her anklet. Details, details, details. That's how you stay calm when you're being pushed. You look at the world in pieces so the whole of it doesn't crush you. The watch was not worthless. That's what I knew. But more than that, it was not just metal and glass. It was the soft echo of my wife's voice when we were young and bold and poor as sparrows. It was the smell of motor oil and pencil shavings from the workshop, where I used to fix little things for neighbors at night to pay our bills. It was a promise I made to myself when I couldn't afford promises. A promise to keep moving as long as the hands were moving. I saw the past like a photograph pulled from a drawer. My wife, Layla, laughing at the kitchen sink while the radio played, her hair falling loose, a dish towel over her shoulder. The day I bought the watch, my fingers were black with grease and my pockets almost empty. The shopkeeper showed me newer models with brighter faces. But I wanted this one. Old-fashioned, heavy, honest. Layla teased me for a week. "You bought time," she said, cupping my face with both hands. "Now, make it worth the price." Later, when we finally had enough to breathe, she took it to a little engraver near the lakeside and had words etched inside the back. "For every second we get." That was all. No dates, no names, just the truth we live by. I remembered the first night I wore it home. Ethan was 2, asleep in his crib with one fist open to the ceiling like he was holding on to a dream. I placed the watch on the nightstand and pressed my ear to his chest. Thub, 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 a small drum. I thought if time ever stopped for me, I'd still hear that drum somewhere. I kissed Layla's hair as she slept, and with the other hand, I cradled the watch. It felt like I was holding both of them. I promised the darkness I'd be worthy. Some promises you keep, not because you're noble, but because you're stubborn, and because someone's smile made you swear you could. Now, Ethan swung the watch on its strap, as if he were practicing to throw it. "We should clear out old junk anyway," he said. He said we, but the house and the walls and the unsteady shelf where he'd put his trophies when he was 12 were mine. He wasn't thinking of that. He was thinking of a new car, a newer vacation, a newer version of himself that didn't have to thank anyone for the roof above his head. Chloe stared at me like I was a painting hung a little crooked. "It's sweet you kept it," she said, voice dipped in sugar. "But it's very, sentimental. You know what I mean?" I nodded. I knew exactly what she meant. I knew the distance between sweet and sentimental when it left someone's mouth like that. It meant cheap. It meant irrelevant. It meant move. "You can throw it away if you want," Ethan added. "It's not even branded." He made a little face at the thought of anything without a logo. His laughter had that youthful ring that makes a room feel smaller. He wanted me to bend. He wanted me to beg. He wanted the old man to crumble so he could feel new. The ticking kept on. That's the thing about a good mechanism. It doesn't argue. It keeps doing what it was built to do. The second hand traced its tiny circle like a skater on a winter pond, sure of the ice underfoot while the wind tried to bully it. I let a slow smile happen, small enough to be missed if you weren't looking, big enough to feel in my jaw. "If you're so sure it's worthless," I said softly, "why don't you take it to a jeweler, get a laugh there too?" I said it as if I were offering him another slice of cake. He brightened at the challenge. Pride loves errands that prove it right. Chloe tilted her head, calculating. I could almost hear the numbers in her mind. A little money for this, a little for that. Nothing for the man who kept the lights on through too many winters. Ethan slipped the watch into his pocket like he had won a prize at a carnival. "Tomorrow," he said. "We'll go tomorrow, for fun." He said, for fun, the way a cat might say, for sport. He reached into the fruit bowl, took an apple, and bit it like a commercial, loud enough to be heard. Juice shone on his lip. He wiped it with the back of his hand, as if he were still the boy who used to come in from the yard and grab whatever was closest. I watched his mouth move and remembered the first time he said "Dad" like a question. The first time he asked me how clocks work. The first time he understood that time moves one way even when we want to go back. Chloe stood and stretched with the ease of someone who trusts the ground beneath her. "We should also talk about the spare room," she said, almost breezy. "It's kind of wasted space." She didn't look at me. She looked at the wall where my wife's shawl used to hang. "We were thinking a home office," Ethan added quickly, trying to bury the greed under a coat of practicality. "It makes sense." That's what people say when they want to make something ugly sound smart. It makes sense. Numbers, plans, progress. They throw words at the pile of their wishes and hope it looks like an altar instead of a trash heap. I let the suggestion sit like a cold coin in my hand. The spare room had a window that smelled like rain when it opened. It had the chair where Layla used to read and fall asleep with the book on her chest, and the little shelf with broken toys I never fixed because life kept happening. Wasted space. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because sometimes laughter is all the room you have to keep from breaking. My smile didn't reach my eyes. "We'll talk after the jeweler," I said. My voice was a flat lake, no ripples. He nodded, already bored by the conversation that didn't end with him winning something. He tossed the apple core toward the trash and missed. It rolled under the table. He didn't notice. Chloe typed something on her phone and smiled at the screen, pleased by a world where everything had like buttons. The ceiling fan kept cutting the air. Steady, steady, steady. The house listened, the way old houses do, storing words in the plaster for years that will come after we're gone. The sun slipped lower, and the light turned the watch's glass into a small, bright eye peeking from Ethan's pocket. I saw my own hand reflected in that round eye, the skin lined, the knuckles knotted. Time's handwriting on a man's body is not cruel, it's honest. It tells you what you carried, what you endured, where you refused to drop your load. I folded my fingers together and felt the strength still living there. Not anger, not yet. Something colder, something clearer, like the air from an open window in winter, the kind that wakes you up without mercy and without apology. I stood. My knees made a quiet sound. "I'm going to make tea," I said. "Want any?" It was a small, ordinary line, the kind that keeps rooms from cracking. Chloe said she didn't drink tea after 5. Ethan said, "Sure," without looking at me, because he'd never refused any comfort easily offered. In the kitchen, I took down the tin with the good leaves. Layla always saved it for guests, but I decided I would use it for my son tonight. The water came to a boil with a soft white hiss. I watched the steam twist and disappear. A clock ticked above the doorframe, not the watch. Another clock, one we never set quite right, but trusted anyway. I poured the water, and the scent rose up. Orange peel, black leaf, a faint memory of winter evenings with warm socks and bad television. I brought the cups back on the old tray with the bent corner. Ethan took his without thanks, sipping and grimacing because his mouth is impatient and good tea asks you to slow down. "Too hot," he said. "Give it a second," I replied, and the words felt like a small bridge across a small river. He set the cup down and drummed his fingers on the table, already thinking about tomorrow, about the laugh he would get from a stranger, about the pleasure of being right. Chloe scrolled, stopped, scrolled again, the light of her screen turning her face pale like moon milk. I sat and held my own cup, but didn't drink. I let my eyes rest on the shelf above the mantel where we kept the important things. A photo of Layla at the lake, smiling at something off camera. A trophy from Ethan's school cricket tournament, where he scored the winning runs. A clay dish he made in art class that was lopsided but brave. The house had been a museum and a playground and a church and a shelter. Now, it was a stage where my son wanted to be the only lead. I did not blame him for wanting. Wanting is a fire. No one teaches you where to point the heat. You learn, or you burn others. When he finished pacing and plans, he looked at me, curious about my quiet as if it were a new kind of furniture he hadn't noticed before. "Don't look so serious," he said. "It's just stuff." I nodded. "Everything is just stuff," I said, "until you know the story." He laughed, light and careless, because stories don't impress people who have never been saved by one. He tapped his pocket. "Tomorrow, we'll get your story," he said. He wanted me to protest, to say no, to make him feel the thrill of breaking a rule. I said nothing. I sipped my tea. The lake inside me was smooth, but I knew where the rocks were. Night arrived in its home clothes. The street outside softened. The sounds pulled a blanket over themselves. I washed the cups and set them in the rack with their faces shining. Chloe said goodnight as if it were a polite way to end a meeting. Ethan, at the doorway to the hall, put his hand on the frame like he used to when he was little, a habit left from a time when hands needed anchors. He looked back at me with that old expression under the new one, the boy peeking through the man like a ghost pressing a forehead to the glass. For a moment, I saw both of them, the boy who loved the watch because it ticked like a tiny heart, and the man who laughed because he was afraid to hear his own. "Good night, Dad," he said. There was no sharp edge to it, just words. I nodded. "Good night, Ethan." He went down the hall with his steps too loud, as if power needed sound to exist. I sat a little longer. The house settled, somewhere a pipe sighed. I reached into my pocket and took out the small key I keep on a ring with my door keys. I turned it in my fingers. The metal was smooth from years of being moved from one pocket to another. The shape of it fit my thumb. I thought of the box in the back of the wardrobe, resting beneath a stack of Layla's shawls. I thought of the envelope inside the box and the other watch that had lived next to this one, like a twin that never spoke. I thought of the words engraved inside the back, "For every second we get." We had gotten many. We had spent them like careful people, trying not to waste even a minute. And still, time had taken what it was owed. I stood again and went to the window. Outside, the sky was a dark bowl with a few chips of light. I could see the reflection of my face in the glass, and behind it the room, the couch where Chloe had sat, the chair where Ethan had leaned and smirked. I touched the glass and felt the cool. A moth knocked itself against the outside pane, hitting, resting, hitting again, as if it believed it could go through if it just wanted enough. Poor thing. We are all poor things when we think force is the only way through. If you're still with me, on your bus, in your bed, at that kitchen table with your cup cooling, tell me this. What would you have said to your child in that moment? Would you have shouted, thrown them out, laughed louder to show you don't break? I did none of those. I put the key back on the ring and closed my hand around it. I looked at the closed door at the end of the hall where my son slept, and I felt the strange peace of a man who knows what time it is, even in the dark. The watch in his pocket kept ticking, small and steady, like a message he hadn't learned to read yet. I turned from the window and walked down the hall to my room, without turning on the light, counting the steps I'd counted 1,000 times, hearing each creak like an old friend telling me, softly, to keep going. Morning came with the gray light that makes everything look like a memory. I woke before the alarm and lay still, listening to the house breathe. A bird pecked at the gutter, a taxi rolled by, a soft growl fading down the street. I reached for the little key on my nightstand and turned it in my fingers once, twice, metal against skin, smooth as a river stone. I opened the wardrobe and moved Layla's shawls aside, one by one, their scent of cardamom and rain rising like a blessing I hadn't earned. The box sat where it always sat, plain, square, stubborn. I lifted the lid, took out the envelope, and traced the edge. The paper had softened over the years. Inside were the things that matter to men like me. A faded receipt with a name most people wouldn't recognize, a letter from a watchmaker whose shop had closed before Ethan was born, a photograph of the watch's twin lying open on a velvet cloth. Proof. Not to wave, but to keep. Time doesn't need witnesses to be true, but people do. I slipped the envelope back into the box and returned the key to my pocket. In the kitchen, the kettle hummed and clicked, a small orchestra of morning. Ethan arrived in his gym shirt, hair wet, breath mint, strong enough to stage a protest of its own. He grinned like the night before hadn't happened, because that's how he survives. He writes on fresh pages and never looks back. Chloe followed, mascara perfect, a tiny coffee in a tiny cup, like the ones you get for guests you don't intend to know. Ready? Ethan said, patting his pocket. I heard the watch answer with a single faint knock against his thigh. Ready, I said. We drove with the windows cracked and the radio low. The city moved around us, busy and indifferent. A man on a bicycle powered, through a red light with a bundle of bread balanced on one arm. A child dragged a backpack along the curb, like a companion she didn't much like but couldn't leave. On the corner, the florist set out buckets of marigolds that shouted color at a sky that couldn't be bothered. Ethan tapped the steering wheel, a drum roll for a joke he thought would land. We'll ask him for scrap value, he said to Chloe, not to me. Maybe enough for a nice dinner. She laughed in that small way that says yes to the speaker and no to the point. Or we could frame it, she added, as a vintage thing. I watched the mirror catch my eyes and give them back to me older. Give it a second, I said, but to myself. The jeweler's shop was a long room in an old building, quietly cool the way some places are cool because respect hangs in the air like a shade. Glass cases ran along both walls, and inside them, rings and bracelets lay still, pretending they had never made anyone cry. The floor had a soft give to it, wood that remembered feet. Behind the counter, a man in a neat shirt and gray beard looked up and smiled, the way professionals smile when they know what everything is worth and wait for you to learn. A bell on the door had chimed when we entered, and now it was quiet again, the silence layered with a low hum from a tiny machine on a back table. Good morning, he said. How can I help? Ethan put his elbows on the counter and laid the watch down like a dare. We were hoping you could take a look, he said. It's old. We think it's, you know. He glanced at Chloe. Worthless, she supplied with a sugary grin. The jeweler didn't laugh. He looked at me instead, and I looked back, steady. May I? He said, not to Ethan, but to me. Of course, I answered. My voice didn't need to be big. It needed to be exact. He used gloved hands. That detail mattered. He lifted the watch and let it rest in his palm for a moment, as if the weight could speak. People who know things listen before they look. Then he set it under a bright lamp and pulled a loop to his eye. the rubber ring making a small squeak against his skin. He said nothing. He breathed out through his nose in a thin stream that fogged the lamp for a second and cleared. Behind us, someone coughed, the kind of polite cough made by people who understand they are near something they won't understand. Ethan shifted, impatient. "So?" he said, bouncing the word lightly. "So," the jeweler echoed softly. He tilted the watch, and the light moved across the glass like water. He peered at the dial, then at the hands, then at the crown, the case, the lugs, every inch touched by the kind of attention most things never get. He turned it over and looked at the back. He angled it under the lamp and then away from it, as if the truth were a fish he could coax to the surface. "Interesting," he said finally, but not to be dramatic. It escaped him the way surprise escapes children. He glanced at me again, polite curiosity pressing the corners of his eyes into fine lines. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "Family," I said. The word stood there between us, bare but strong. The jeweler nodded slowly. "May I open it?" he asked again. "Please," I said. His hands moved with the care of someone washing a newborn. He used a thin blade to lift the back without scratching the metal. When it gave, he didn't exhale. He paused as if any noise might spook what he was hoping to see. Then the back was off, and the movement lay there blinking up at him. Tiny gears, bridges, springs. Order made into a heart. He leaned in. The loop clicked softly against his eyebrow. "Good Lord," he murmured, voice so low I felt it before I heard it. Ethan rolled his eyes. "Is it that bad?" he joked at Chloe, who wore a smile that was more shell than face. The jeweler ignored him. "Do you see this running stone?" he asked, not waiting for an answer. "This balance, these shock settings. He reached for a UV lamp, flooded the inside with a ghostly glow, and watched. He turned off the light. He looked at the rim, where a number was engraved so small it could have been a rumor. He looked at the bridge again. Then he did something that made Ethan choke on his impatience. He took a step back, lifted his hands from the bench, and looked at the watch the way you look at a person who has just told you something about the world you will never forget. He walked to a shelf and pulled down a gray binder, the kind that make librarians sigh with love. He laid it open next to the watch, pages full of black and white photographs of watches that no one should own, because owning them would make you feel unworthy of being human. He traced a line with his finger, stopped, frowned. Then he pulled another book, this one older, the paper yellowed at the edges. He flipped pages until his fingertip landed on a picture that made him still. He tilted the watch to match what he saw. Tiny details lined up like stars in a sailor's sky. A scratch that belongs there because it is not a scratch, but a mark only a certain set of hands in a certain year would leave. A bridge shape that was abandoned after a small run. A font on a dial that was used for less than one season because the world didn't like it as much as the watchmaker did. He swallowed. The sound was loud in the quiet room. "Sir," he said, and for the first time his voice carried a tremor. "I'm going to ask you something a bit unusual. May I call a colleague? He's 5 minutes away. I don't want to say anything without him seeing this." Ethan laughed. "Is it that rare?" he asked, aiming his grin at Chloe, who shrugged as if agreeing couldn't possibly cost her anything. The jeweler did not answer him. He waited for my eyes. I nodded. "Call him." Those 5 minutes lasted an hour and a lifetime, the way 5 minutes do when you are waiting for a verdict you can feel in your bones, but no one has spoken yet. Ethan paced, scrolled, sighed. "This is ridiculous," he said under his breath, loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's a watch, not a cure." Chloe touched his arm, performative tenderness painted on like gloss. The bell chimed again, and a thin man with careful hair entered, eyes bright with curiosity that had not yet been cauterized by years of being right. He shook the jeweler's hand, glanced at me and at Ethan, then bent over the bench. The room tightened around his silence. He didn't take as long. He knew where to look. "The movement," he murmured. "It's correct. The plate layout, the screw types, the finish. God." He tilted the dial toward the light. "And the dial, whoever restored this didn't. It's original. Look at the minute track, look at the font. And here, see this? The signature that isn't a signature. They did that for 3 months in..." He looked up at me, eyes wide now. "Where did your family live in 1947? My mouth went dry for a heartbeat, then wet again with memory. "By the lake," I said. "A small town. A watchmaker would come through in winter. He smiled, amazed at how the world folds into itself if you give it time. Then this is exactly what I think it is. Ethan smirked. And that is? He asked, making room in his tone for a punchline that would let him laugh again. The jeweler's colleague put the loop down, took a breath, and said, a pre-series piece from a top Swiss maison, made in a tiny run before public release, likely hand-finished by the lead watchmaker himself, sold to select customers who were more friends than clients. The number on your bridge puts it within the first dozen, one like it hammered at Geneva last year for... He stopped and looked at the main jeweler, as if asking permission to say the number out loud. The older man nodded once, solemn. For just over $1 million, all in. The room did not move for a second. It held its breath like a diver under ice. Then time exhaled again. A sound escaped from Ethan's throat. A small, involuntary click, like a door that doesn't quite close. He blinked as if someone had turned the world too bright, and his eyes hadn't figured out how to narrow. The color left his face so honestly that for a moment I worried about him. Chloe's mouth parted, then cautiously closed, like she was afraid a word might fall out and shatter on the tile. $1 million, Ethan repeated, and the word didn't behave like a word for him. It behaved like a wall. He reached for the watch, then stopped his hand midair, unsure of his right to touch it now that it had become a different thing. The jeweler kept his palm over the bench, not possessive, just protective. We should talk about insurance, he said gently to me, and storage, and documentation. He glanced at Ethan, not unkindly, but the way a nurse glances at a visitor, and then at the patient, choosing the one who needs care. I let my eyes fall to the open back where the movement breathed. The engraving inside the case caught the light and threw it back in a whisper. For every second we get. The words swung through me like a slow bell. I felt Layla at my shoulder, the way you feel a draft that isn't a draft. The temperature of love changing the room by small degrees. Ethan swallowed again. His Adam's apple moved like guilt does when it bumps into a truth it can't argue with. Dad, he said, and it was the boy's voice that came out. The one from the bicycle fall. The one from a night when thunder taught him to count to 10 between lightning and boom. I didn't know. His hand hovered, then pulled back, like even his apologies were afraid to land. It keeps good time, I said softly. The line returned to me, simple and clean. And this time, it didn't sound like I was defending a memory. It sounded like I was testifying. We can help with everything, the jeweler said, business moving in gently at the edges of awe. We can send it for official papers, arrange coverage, recommend a secure vault. You should not be walking around with this. He looked at Ethan's pocket as if it had been a cliff we had stepped away from without noticing. The colleague nodded. If you choose to sell, the international houses will fight for it. But I would advise... He stopped and smiled at me, choosing not to place a hand on a shoulder he did not know. I would advise thinking before deciding. Sometimes keeping time is worth more than trading it. Ethan found his words and clutched them like a child in a crowd. We should sell it, he said, too quickly, the old reflex reaching out for the old prize. Chloe's eyes flashed agreement, then softened when she felt the new air in the room. The jeweler's gaze moved to me and stayed there, waiting. I let the silence sit, then I nodded once. For now, I said, it should be safe. I looked at Ethan when I said it. He mistook my meaning and sagged with relief, imagining bank transfers and zeros that looked like lakes. The jeweler took out a form and a small white tray and a plastic sleeve that was not plastic so much as a kind of carefulness made visible. He placed the watch in the sleeve and sealed it, the locking sound quiet but definite, like the last page of a chapter laid down flat. Ethan tried to smile again. It got lost on his face, then found a corner and sat there awkwardly. Dad, he began, and the word was sincere enough to make something warm bloom and then fold in my chest. I was joking last night. You know how I am? We were just... Laughing, I finished for him. He winced. Yeah. He tried to find purchase on a slope that had turned to ice beneath him. It's amazing, right? For you. He added the last two words like a gift that cost him nothing, and therefore should be cherished. Chloe reached for my sleeve, and then thought better of it. We're so happy for you, she said brightly, like a hostess congratulating a guest on winning a raffle for a basket of jams. This changes everything. She meant the furniture, the rooms, the car she would picture herself in later that night when sleep refused her kindness. I looked at her and remembered how much effort it takes to build a person who can be gentle when life shows up with a straight face and an empty hand. Some of us never get that build. Some of us unlearn it. The jeweler cleared his throat. "Sir, if you like, we can hold it in our vault until the paperwork is complete. You'll have a receipt and full valuation within a week. No obligation." He glanced at Ethan and at Chloe with a caution that was not judgment but experience dressed in a plain shirt. I nodded. "Please keep it safe." He smiled, small and honest. "It already is." We signed papers. I wrote my name carefully, each letter in its place, the way Layla taught Ethan to do when his teacher sent home a note that his handwriting was running away from him. Ethan watched the pen move and said nothing. His phone lay face down on the counter, a rare position for that little altar. When the last copy was slid across to me, the jeweler held my gaze a second longer than needed. "If there are any documents at home," he said, "old receipts, letters, anything, bring them when you can. Provenance matters." I felt the key in my pocket press into my leg, a nod from the past. "I have a few," I said. We stepped back onto the street, the bell giving us a farewell it had withheld on the way in. The air was warmer, traffic had discovered its horn. Ethan blinked into the daylight like it hurt. Chloe tucked hair behind her ear, an old habit of girls who were taught to be tidy when the world smudged. For half a block, no one spoke. Then Ethan tried again. "I'm sorry," he said to the sidewalk, to the passing cars, to the morning that had turned into a mirror and made him look. I shouldn't have said what I said." He was building a bridge with string. I didn't cut it. "Words matter," I said. "We build houses with them, or we burn them." He nodded, the movement small, as if he was afraid large gestures might make the truth notice him and come back. "We'll make it right," he added quickly, because he thinks everything can be fixed by declaring the future in the present tense. "We'll plan, we'll—" "Give it a second," I said. The phrase had become a rope for me, something to hold while the path curved. He swallowed and let the rope rest between us. At home, the house felt different, not because the watch wasn't in it, but because the laughter from last night had nowhere to sit. It hovered and then drifted out a window I hadn't opened. Chloe went straight to the kitchen and busied herself with a glass she didn't need to wash. Ethan stood in this living room and stared at the spot where he had held the watch up, like a punchline that had turned into a lesson. "Dad," he said, "we should talk about the spare room." The old script tried to climb back onto the stage. I let it stand there on its little legs and wobble. "After we sort the paperwork," I replied. My voice was calm enough to iron a shirt. He was pale again, but this time with a different kind of blood leaving his face. A shame that had a long walk ahead of it if it wanted to become anything useful. "Okay," he said. He rubbed the edge of the mantle with his thumb, the way he did at 15 when he was about to tell me he'd been suspended for a day, and had convinced himself I would be proud of his courage. "I'll make tea," he added, moving toward the kitchen like a man who had discovered the existence of bridges and wanted to try one. "I'll make it," I said, and he stopped, not offended, just relieved. In the quiet that followed, the house and I listened to one another. Somewhere in the back, a pipe ticked as it cooled. On the mantel, the photo of Layla smiled, as if she could hear a song I was too human to catch. I set the kettle on and leaned against the counter, palm flat to the wood, feeling the grain like a heartbeat that belonged to a tree that had been alive longer than any of us. Ethan hovered near the doorway, his shadow on the tile like a boy who didn't know how to enter a room he had already filled. "Dad," he said again, softer, "thank you for taking it to the shop." I looked at him and saw, for a moment, the boy with the red O of a mouth and the bicycle-scraped knees. "It keeps good time," I said, and the kettle began to sing. The kettle sang and the steam curled into the quiet, and I poured the tea slow because that is how a man keeps the room from leaning. Ethan hovered in the doorway, like he used to when he had done something wrong and wasn't sure if I already knew. He watched my hands. Hands tell the truth long before mouths do. I slid a cup toward him, and he took it with 2 fingers and a breath that steadied itself halfway between old pride and new fear. "We'll sort the paperwork," he said softly, and the words wore a suit that didn't fit him yet. "We will," I answered, and I let the calm sit between us like a chair no one wanted to move. I felt the small key in my pocket pressing gently into my thigh, reminding me that time is a door if you keep the right metal close. After he left for work, the house and I listened to each other for a while. Then I put on my jacket, took the thin brown folder from the back of the wardrobe, and stepped into a day that had decided to look like rain without committing. At the bank, the manager greeted me by name with a respectful nod that makes a man feel seen without being shown. The vault smelled faintly of walnut and cold. In the little room, with the square table and the chair that had watched too many secrets sit down, I set my box on the surface and turned the key. There are sounds you never forget, even if you hear them once. Your child's first laugh, your wife's last breath, the click of a lock that keeps what matters safe. Inside the box lay the paper Layla and I had signed on a summer afternoon when the jacaranda trees were in bloom and Ethan was still a boy who thought treasure belonged to pirates and fathers. A trust document with simple lines and the clear ink of a lawyer who preferred plain words to fancy traps. The villa placed in the Layla Foundation, trusteeship, me. Use rights, me until I die. Conditions for transfer, only to a child who holds the house as a home for family and the door for me as long as I breathe. No sale without trustee consent. A letter in Layla's hand, small and steady. For every second we get, let our son learn to value what we build, not what he can take. I traced the letters with the pad of my finger like a blind man reading a prayer. Beneath those papers lay the envelope the jeweler had asked for. Faded receipt, watchmaker's letter, photographs of my wrist in our first apartment, my hair still black, my eyes naive enough to think time would be a generous landlord, and beneath those, wrapped in a scrap of Layla's shawl, the quiet twin with the plain face, the other watch that had lived in our drawer like a secret that preferred to love from the dark. It was not the $1,000,000 story, no. It was the one that kept our mornings honest and our nights on time for 30 years. I lifted it, and the weight sat in my palm like a warm stone. You and your brother, I said to it without shame, because men talk to the objects that survive their promises. I closed the box, signed the ledger, nodded to the manager, and walked out into a street that had finally decided to rain. Fat drops dotted the pavement like fresh commas. At home, I called Ethan. Bring Chloe, I said. We'll have dinner. 7. He hesitated, silence bending into a question, but then he said, We will, and the line clicked off as if it were embarrassed by what it used to carry. Later, Chloe called me back, her voice dipped in honey that had hidden a bee. My parents are in town, she said too casually. We thought we'd invite them. They'd, like to see you. There was a rustle, then a small cough, the kind that means a conversation had a rehearsal. We can discuss the house plans. My father knows an agent who can advise. I looked at the rain on the window and watched one drop chase another and catch it only to become one. Invite them, I said, and I thought of wolves who put on slippers so the floor won't hear them. I set the table with the good plates, not for a show, out of respect for the room. They arrived with weather on their coats and opinions on their tongues. Chloe's mother went straight to the mirror and fixed what the rain had done to her hair. Chloe's father shook my hand, as if I were a doorman with a good memory. He smiled at the house with a look that weighed, measured, and converted. Charming, he said. He didn't mean it. Ethan kissed his mother-in-law's cheek and stood taller when his father-in-law clapped him on the back, the old male ritual that says, You belong if I say you do. Behind them floated a man in a blazer too tight across the chest and a tie that thought too much of itself. He carried a shiny folder with a logo stamped gold on the front, and the certain face of someone who had been promised an easy pitch. This is Jamie, Chloe said. He helps families make decisions. She said decisions as if it were a perfume. The agent's handshake was soft and fast. A bird flying in and out of a window it shouldn't know how to open. We ate slowly because slow eating keeps words from running. I served food I knew everyone liked and watered the wine a little with small talk. The room filled with clinks and the polite laughter people use to keep the peace busy while war gets dressed in the hallway. Finally, Chloe's father cleared his throat the way men do when they want a gavel without a courtroom. So, he said to Ethan, not to me, tell us the plan. Ethan, eyes finding mine like buoys, squared his shoulders and folded his napkin like a contract. We were thinking, he began, and the we landed like a shoe on my chest, that it's sensible to update things. You know, refresh the house, maybe reconfigure some rooms. The spare could be an office. We could optimize space, there's a lot of value sitting idle. Chloe's mother nodded with a smile that had furniture catalogs behind its teeth. The agent spread his glossy folder and showed me a picture of a house that had never smelled like soup. "These are comps," he announced pleasantly. "We're in a seller's market. With a few smart upgrades, you could realize gains that—" He stopped because I held up my hand, and even his ambition respected a palm that steady. "Before we talk," I said, "let me bring something from the study." I stood without hurry. The room watched me walk because it had learned to. In the study, I opened the brown folder, took out the trust, the deed, the letter, and the small black pen that writes the same whether you are rich, poor, wise, or foolish. I returned and set the papers on the table, the way a man places bread and salt for guests who need to remember how to be guests. "Read," I said, and the word was not an order, but a door. The agent reached first, and, of course, and skimmed with that special speed that fools teach themselves. Chloe's father leaned over his shoulder, then stepped back, then leaned in again because pride and surprise fight in the middle of the face before the eyes choose. Ethan picked up the letter in Layla's hand and his mouth tightened at her name, as if it were a spice he had forgotten and tasted again by accident. "What is this?" Chloe's mother asked, smile drying. "It's a trust," the agent said carefully, the gold on his folder suddenly looking cheap, placing the property in a foundation overseen by— He scanned for the word and found it too easily. "The trustee. That would be you," he added, glancing at me with a respect he should have started with. "There are conditions, strong ones." He cleared his throat. "Sale requires trustee consent. Occupancy rights, lifelong." Chloe's father exhaled through his nose, a bull trying not to lower its head and make a fool of itself in a china shop. "And this was— when?" He looked for a date and found it. The summer of Jacaranda. He frowned as if the tree owed him an apology. Ethan read Layla's letter a second time, and then again, as if he could change the meaning by staring hard. His lips moved on the words, "value what we build." He sat back in his chair. The agent shifted and tried a new angle. "Of course, plans can be revisited," he offered, voice inviting me to a dance I had already declined. "With mutual agreement, families often forget," I said, my tone flat as a clean blade. "That's why people write things down." He nodded quickly, mouth agreeing, while his eyes counted other houses he could sell instead. Chloe's mother reached for her glass, found the stem with fingers that wanted to be rings. Her bracelets clicked on the table like clocks scolding a late child. "It was only a suggestion," she said sweetly, the sugar now showing its knife. "We want the best for everyone." I looked at her, and at her daughter, and at my son. "Best means safe," I said. "Best means respect. Best means doors you don't try to sell while someone is still living behind them." Ethan swallowed. His Adam's apple moved like a small boat on rough water. He tried a smile at me, the one he used at 10 when he had broken a neighbor's window, and wanted me to call it an accident, so the world could be kind for another afternoon. "Dad, I didn't know about this," he said. "You didn't tell me." "I was waiting," I said, "for you to be a man I could trust with the door." The words did not shout. They didn't need to. They found their place and lay down on the table between the plates. The agent cleared his throat and gathered his folder like a magician admitting the dove was a trick. "I'll leave you to your evening," he said, face polite, dreams recalculating. At the door he turned to me and opened his mouth to say something professional, then shut it and simply nodded once, the realest thing he had done all day. Chloe's father watched him go, then turned back, jaw set for a charge that the ground would not allow. "You're putting obstacles in your son's path," he announced, mistaking money for road and character for pothole. "I'm removing temptation," I replied. "They are not the same craft." He scoffed, a sound small, enough to show he didn't have a larger one. Chloe looked pale, and then pink, and then pale again. "We only wanted to help," she murmured. "We are a team." She squeezed Ethan's arm as if pressure could force a shape into a softer metal. Ethan looked at her hand, at the papers, at me. "I said something ugly," he admitted. "Two things," I corrected, and the correction didn't sting. It clarified. He breathed out. "Two things," he repeated, and his shoulders dropped a fraction, as if the weight of admitting was the only gym that builds the right muscle. The rain eased. In the quiet after, a phone buzzed on the counter with the small authority of news. I checked the screen. The jeweler. Put it on speaker, Chloe's mother said brightly, a gossip's reflex disguised as community. I did. Sir, the jeweler's voice came clean into my kitchen, the little bell of his shop hiding in his throat. I wanted to let you know we've secured the watch in our vault. The preliminary valuation aligns with our first estimate, and the authentication process has begun. We'll courier copies of the initial report this evening. There's already interest, quiet, serious interest. A museum has called. Ethan closed his eyes. The room did not move. Thank you, I said. One more thing, the jeweler added. If you find any documentation, old letters, receipts, anything, it will only strengthen the story. I touched the folder with my fingertip. I have a few, I said. I'll bring them tomorrow. Wonderful, he replied, and his voice smiled. Also, if I may, you bought time, years ago. It's paying you back now. The line clicked. The kitchen looked at Ethan, and Ethan looked at the floor. Chloe's father cleared his throat again, but the sound had changed. It was smaller. Well, he started, and the word was a ladder looking for a wall. Well, he said again, and this time it found nothing to lean on. He stood, smoothed his blazer, and offered me a hand. I took it. It felt like someone setting down a weight they had no right to pick up. He guided his wife toward the door, murmuring something about traffic and appointments and the rain. At the threshold, he paused. Congratulations, he said. Not unkind, the word did not taste good in his mouth, but he didn't spit it out. When they were gone, the house exhaled in relief and in habit. Chloe sat, then stood, then sat again, the chair a raft she wasn't sure about. I didn't know about the letter, she said to the table. About Layla. She used my wife's name as if it were a window she was willing to open. I nodded. She knew about you, I said. She knew someone would come with a folder and a plan. That's why she wrote it down. Chloe's eyes filled, then emptied, like cups that aren't sure if they want to be used. She touched Ethan's wrist. We were wrong, she whispered. Ethan stared at the trust and then at his fingers. The hands of a man who had been given much and thought the gift was proof of his own giving. He laced them together and tried to make them look like prayer. I didn't want to be the bad guy, he said. It was a joke. It's how we... He searched for the word and it ran away. I was cruel. He found the simple word because the fancy ones weren't coming. He looked up. His eyes were wet. He hated that. Dad, Not today, Ethan, I said quietly, the line arriving like a boat I had built years ago for a moment when the river rose. You'd be in the way. He blinked, shocked by the softness of the sentence and the steel in its spine. I didn't leave him there. I let the line stretch into its second half. Let the papers speak. Let time do some of the talking. We've pushed our voices into rooms they didn't belong. He nodded. He learned to nod today. He reached for the letter again and held it carefully, as if paper could bruise. He read Layla's words out loud this time, and each syllable knelt on the tile and kissed the place where better decisions might grow. Value what we build, he said, and his voice was almost a boy's again. Not what you can take. He set the letter down and wiped his face with the heel of his hand, a gesture he had from me. I don't know how to fix it, he admitted. Give it a second, I said, and we both smiled at the rope that was keeping us from falling into the old hole. After dinner, he helped clear the table without being told. He washed, I dried. Chloe stacked plates with a care that wasn't performance, but learning with her fingers. We worked in a rhythm that houses like. The room warmed a little. Later, when the dishes were clean and the papers were back in their folder and the rain had decided to be drizzle for a while, I brought out the other watch, the quiet twin wrapped in Layla's shawl scrap. I placed it on the table without introduction. Ethan looked at it the way a man looks at a photograph of himself from before he grew armor. There were two, he whispered. I nodded. This one kept us on time for school buses and doctor's appointments and movie nights and deadlines. The other one kept us believing in the kindness of chance and the patience of work. They lived together, like some brothers do when one talks and the other listens. He reached out and stopped before touching, waiting for permission the way a son should. I nudged it toward him. Wind it, I said. He did. The crown turned and the movement woke, and the tick filled the little valley of our silence with something like forgiveness. He held it to his ear and closed his eyes, and for a moment, with his head bent, he was 7 again, and the world was big, but not bigger than our kitchen. He laughed then, a small, surprised sound that didn't cut. it mended. "It sounds like a heartbeat," he murmured. "It always did," I said. "You used to sleep with it under your pillow when you had nightmares. You said it fought the bad dreams for you." He smiled and shook his head, and some of the hardness broke off and fell somewhere I couldn't see. "Will you sell the other one?" he asked finally. He meant the question honestly, not as a calculation, but as a confession. I let the night stretch a little and then answered. "I will decide," I said. "Not because of the money, because of the story." He nodded like a man who had just learned why the world keeps certain weather in certain places. He looked around the room at the chair where he had done homework, at the mantel where his trophy still leaned, at the photo where his mother's smile kept watch. He breathed in, as if air could be a pen. "I want to stay for a while," he said. "If that's okay, I want to read her letters." "It's your home," I said, "when you make it one." We sat until the clock in the hall put its hand on our shoulders and told us to stand. When he and Chloe went down the hall to their room, he touched the doorframe with the flat of his hand, an old habit turning itself back on. I turned off lights, and the house slipped into its nightskin. In my room, I laid the folder on the nightstand and placed the old key beside it. I could hear the other watch ticking faintly from the living room, the sound traveling through wood and memory. I lay down and looked at the ceiling, which had taken all our watching for years and never complained. Somewhere a car door shut, and a dog decided to forgive the world. I closed my eyes and saw Layla's letter, her small, steady script, for every second we get. I thought of tomorrow, of the jeweler's report, of the bank vault, of documents and signatures and decisions that would not be called decisions by anyone with sense, but by their right name, promises kept. I turned my head and listened to the house breathe, and the breath sounded like water and like time and like the soft, repeating word a father learns to say when anger knocks and he does not open. Wait. Morning put a soft hand on the house, and I woke with the sense that something inside the rooms had shifted into place while we slept. I brewed tea, opened the kitchen window, and let the cool air rinse the night from the tiles. Ethan came in quiet, like a boy who has finally learned that doors have handles for a reason. He didn't reach for his phone first. He reached for 2 cups. "I'll pour," he said. It was a small sentence, but it fit him better than the bigger ones. We drove to the jeweler with the brown folder on my lap. The city was washing its face, hoses hissing, shop shutters rattling, bread smells lifting their arms to stretch. "What will you do?" Ethan asked, eyes forward. His voice was careful, almost barefoot. "About the watch." I turned the question over like a coin to feel its weight. "Decide," I said, "with time, not with noise." He nodded as if learning the difference. Would take a life and be worth it. The bell at the jeweler's door chimed the way it does when a room remembers you. He looked up as if he'd been expecting a story to arrive on 2 legs. "Good morning," he said, honest pleasure warming his words. I laid the folder on the counter and opened it. The old receipt, the watchmaker's letter, the photograph that caught Layla's laughter in the edge of its frame like a blessing that didn't mind being caught. He slipped on his gloves and handled each page as if paper had bones. "Perfect," he murmured. "Better than perfect. It's a map." His colleague appeared from the back with a white envelope, clean, heavy, official. "Preliminary report," he said, and slid it across to me. "Authentic, early, exceptional. We attached insurance recommendations." The jeweler smiled as if someone had told a good joke he wasn't going to ruin by explaining it. "There is also a letter," he added, "from the museum I mentioned. They don't buy, they ask. To borrow, exhibit, tell the story right." Ethan shifted beside me, and I heard the breath leave him. A small, surprised sound, not quite a sigh. "A museum?" His voice held both pride and regret. "They want Mom's engravings in a glass case." He caught himself. "Layla's words." He corrected it like he was learning to say please with more than his lips. The jeweler placed a second envelope on the counter. "And," he said, "there is interest from an auction house in Geneva, discreet, aggressive. If selling becomes your path, the path is paved." He held my gaze. "You don't have to choose today." I opened the museum letter. The paper smelled faintly of dust and quiet. They had written my name with care, not selling, not reaching, just inviting. A small exhibition on timekeeping's hidden histories. a section for pieces whose value began in kitchens and workbenches before it moved to catalogs and bids. They would title the label with whatever I chose. They suggested nothing. I pictured people walking slowly past, glass and light. I saw a little boy stop and press his hands to the barrier while his mother read the tag out loud, her voice softening at the end, because the last line mattered more than the first. I saw Layla's words engraved inside the back and imagined them glowing under museum bulbs like a quiet truth, finally given a microphone. "Loan," I said. Ethan turned to me, eyes searching. "Loan?" He tasted the word as if it might be bitter. "Not sell," I said. "Not yet, maybe not ever." I let the decision stand up on its own two legs. It's not a lottery ticket, it's a story. If we share it, people who never met your mother will still leave with a piece of her. The jeweler's smile was small and glad. Ethan nodded, once, twice, as if words were stepping stones across a river and he was testing each. "We'd put her name on it," he said carefully. "Layla's watch, or Layla's time." The second one made the room warm. The jeweler wrote it down like a witness. We handled forms. The watch would remain in the vault pending final authentication, and then travel under guard where it needed to go. The museum courier would come with a hard case and gravity in his walk. I initialed where a lifetime requires initials. Ethan took the pen when I handed it to him, and looked at me for permission, the way a hand looks at a shoulder before it rests there. "Sign as witness," I said. His name came out steady. The letters stayed put. He put the pen down as if it were a little animal that had finally fallen asleep. On the way out, the jeweler touched the counter with 2 fingers, a gesture that meant respect without fuss. "Sir," he said, "may I suggest something?" I nodded. "When the exhibition opens, bring your son. Let him hear other people tell the story back to you." He smiled at Ethan. "Sometimes value is loud in a room, and sometimes it's the quietest thing there. Good to know both." Ethan thanked him, and the word didn't stumble. We walked into a day that had decided to be bright. Sun pooled on the pavement. A bus sighed and moved on. Ethan put his hands in his pockets, pulled them out again, like he was learning new choreography. "Dad," he said, "I need to say something without asking anything." He stopped on the sidewalk and looked at me full. "I was cruel. I laughed at your years. I pushed you out of your home with a joke." He swallowed. "I knew the joke was a knife. I wanted it to be." The sentence hung there, heavy and honest and exactly the right size. "I'm ashamed," he finished. The word made room for more air between us. "I know," I said, "not a pardon, a fact. Shame can be a compass if you let it point." He smiled with one corner of his mouth. "I don't know what to do with it yet." "We'll give it a second," I said. He laughed for real, and the sound didn't bruise. At home, I opened the wardrobe and brought the foundation files to the table. "There's something else," I told him and Chloe when she came in from a call, her eyes bright with the work of unlearning. "Your mother wanted this house to be a place where value is made, not extracted. I set up the Layla Foundation to make that true. It isn't just a name on paper, it has a purpose." I placed a thinner stack beside the trust. Scholarship funds, tool grants for teenagers who choose trades, small loans for single parents starting kitchens from their apartments. I have done it alone long enough. It needs hands younger than mine. I looked at Ethan. "If you want the keys to rooms in this house one day, you carry keys to that work now." Chloe sank into a chair, breath catching. Ethan stared at the paperwork as if it might speak. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. And for the first time since he grew tall, the question didn't make him smaller. It made him honest. I slid a notebook across. "Start here. Write a plan for this year. 3 projects, real ones. Faces, not numbers. And you will show up, not as the boss, as the boy who once fell off a bicycle and let someone pick him up." He nodded. "And if I fail?" "You will," I said gently. "Often. Bring those stories too. We will build the plan out of them." Chloe leaned forward. "Can I help?" she asked, voice almost childlike in its hope. "Not with spreadsheets, with people. My mother—" She stopped, corrected herself. "I was not raised to see the difference, but I can learn." I believed her. Not because she looked sincere, but because pictures on the mantel were looking at her, and she still kept her eyes open. "You can help," I said, "if you mean it when the cameras aren't there." We spent the afternoon on the floor with papers spread like maps of a country we had lived in, but never truly explored. The doorbell interrupted us once. A courier handed me a hard envelope, the museum's formal loan agreement, a press release draft, a request for a title, and a line of context. Layla's Time, I wrote in the box for title. Under context, I wrote, bought with love, kept with work. Engraved inside, for every second we get. Loaned in her name so strangers can remember their own. I signed where a life asks you to sign, and when I looked up, Ethan's eyes were full. He blinked and laughed at himself and didn't look away. We took a break and ate in the backyard, where the mango tree throws a shade that still smells like the summer. Layla hung fairy lights and declared the yard a tiny festival. The wind moved the leaves. They clapped soft, as if approving. Ethan stared at the grass and then reached under the table. He came up with a browned apple core, flattened slightly where a foot had found it days ago. He looked at it like a relic. That was me, he said. He walked to the trash and dropped it in with a small, decisive thump. I'll start there, clean what I pretend not to see. I didn't speak. I let the mango tree say good idea with its leaves. Evening slid in on the backs of the swallows. We returned to the table and drew circles and arrows and lists. Chloe wrote names she'd heard at a clinic she volunteered at once and never went back to because the waiting room scared her. She underlined them and looked at me. We could start here, she said. No cameras. Just help. Ethan found the old clay dish he made at 11 and set it in front of us with the seriousness of a man offering bread. For keys, he said. For phone-free hours while we work. He dropped his phone into it first. It made a satisfying, humbled sound. The jeweler called again, voice carrying a smile like a note passed quietly in class. The museum would like to schedule a brief interview, he said. They want your voice on the audio guide. I almost said no. Then I heard Layla in my head say, tell it, yourself. Don't let the world guess. Yes, I replied, but only if they also record my son. Silence. Then the gentlest chuckle. Of course. The next week moved like a slow river, steady and honest. Paperwork filed, insurance finalized. The vault opened and closed. The watch traveled in a case that looked like a little spaceship. The courier held it like a promise. At night, I lay awake sometimes and listened to the other watch ticking on the dresser and thought of strangers who would stand in front of glass and see my wife's words. I pictured them reaching for a hand they loved. Maybe they would hold it tighter by the time they walked out. On the day of the exhibition opening, we dressed simple. No tuxedos, clean shirts, quiet shoes. The museum smelled like dust that had learned to read. People drifted from case to case with the reverent shuffle humans invent around objects that outlive their makers. A curator led us to a glass rectangle where light made small halos on polished steel. There it was, the watch. The dial honest, the hands calm, the case humble enough to make a proud man think about why. Beside it, a card. Layla's Time, it said in letters that didn't shout, and beneath, bought with love, kept with work. Engraved inside, for every second we get, loaned by her husband for strangers who need reminding. I swallowed. The air felt like the first day you know grief won't bury you. We listened to the audio guide. My voice came in first, older, measured. I spoke about saving for a thing not because it was shiny, but because it would tell me, when everything was dark, to keep going. I kept it short. Then Ethan's voice, younger, careful. He spoke about laughter that hurt and a lesson that stopped it. He did not beg, he did not perform. He said, I thought value was loud. I was wrong. I heard people around us step closer to the case. A woman squeezed her partner's hand. A boy pressed his nose to the glass until a guard smiled and gently tapped the sign. An old man wiped his eyes and told a stranger about the clock in his father's shed that never failed, and how he had been unkind once when the shed smelled like rust and work, and he was too young to know what he was walking away from. The stranger listened. That is a kind of prayer. Ethan stood beside me, hands at his sides, not in his pockets. He said nothing for a long time. Then, finally, thank you. Not as apology, not as payment, but as gratitude for air. We walked the hall. People looked at the watch, and then at us, and then back at the watch. No one pointed. No one asked for a photo. It was not a spectacle. It was a room of quiet truths and objects that know how to outlast us without being cruel about it. When we got home, we didn't talk about sales or markets or numbers. We talked about the girl from Chloe's clinic who needed tools, the boy who wanted to apprentice at a shop where hands still fix instead of throwing away. We filled the clay dish with the keys of people who promised 2 hours a week. We set rules: no shouting, no sprints, no pretending. We wrote them on a paper and taped it to the fridge like a family draws a map of a country they mean to live in without invading each other. Night came and the house breathed the way it used to, the way it always wanted to. I sat at the table with Layla's letters spread like small flags. Ethan placed the other watch, our quiet companion, between us. "Wind?" he asked. I nodded, and he did, and the tick rose like a heartbeat, finding its courage. We drank tea that had the taste of oranges and dark leaf in winter evenings, and the ceiling fan cut the air into patient slices, and the kitchen smelled like something that refuses to leave when it's no longer being cooked. Love. I thought of the day he held up my watch and laughed. I thought of the way Chloe's giggle scraped its way into my chest and sat there like a pin. I thought of the jeweler's gloved hands and the way his breath fogged the lamp before it cleared. I thought of the letter in my doddering script, and the trust in the summer of Jacaranda, and the agent's folder turning light in his hands when respect finally entered the room. I thought of the museum glass, and of strangers who stop and listen to a sentence, because somewhere inside them there's a matching echo. I thought of the apple core under the table, and the small thump it made when my son put it where it belonged. I thought of how sometimes justice is not a hammer. Sometimes it's a balance wheel, small, relentless. It keeps time when people forget how. Ethan looked at me, his face open in a way that would have broken me if I'd still been made of anger. "Dad," he said, "will you teach me how to fix things?" "Yes," I said, "but first, we'll learn how to wait." He laughed and didn't mind the lesson. He reached into the clay dish, lifted his phone, and then set it down again. We listened to the ticking, and to the house, and to the quiet that had more to say than the noise ever did. If you've come this far with me, on your bus, in your bed, in a kitchen that smells like tea or last night's heat, tell me where you're reading from. Tell me what time means to you. Have you ever been laughed at by someone you love and lived to turn the sound into something softer? Have you ever put a story in glass so other people could see themselves? If this moved you, if it reminded you to call your father, or to forgive your son, to wind the old watch, or to write the letter you've been avoiding, like this, share it with someone who forgets. Leave a comment with your own story, and subscribe so you don't miss the next time a quiet thing shows the room how loud value can be.